So we continue. We continue with the Avos, with our forefathers, with foremothers. I don't know why they call them forefathers. There's only three of them, but foremothers I understand because there's four of them.
Hello, Rabbi Fine.
Jason, good to see you. Welcome.
Yeah.
Welcome. So, hold on. Okay. All right. So we continue in the book of Bereshis. Another name for it is called Sefer HaYashar, the book of the straight, because we're dealing with those people who are upright, they're straight, they're not bent over. It says an interesting thing about Mashiach. The Mashiach will be upright. What does it mean upright? Stand straight. The truth is, when you think about it, folks, 2,000 years that we have been in exile, since the destruction of the second Beis Hamikdash, collectively as a people, we're not standing up straight. Individually, we're not standing up straight because the pain and the burden of exile has been so strong, so devastating, that even though we live in a free country and so on, but what it means in the spirit, in our spirit, it's been affected in such a manner that the weight of gullus, of exile, is formidable, and therefore we don't stand up straight. Standing up straight here doesn't mean physically, it means of spirit, that we have strength. And so it says Mashiach will stand straight, and it will teach us how to stand straight. So where do we originally get that power from? It's from Sefer HaYashar, the book of the straight, which is the Sefer Bereshis. So let's understand some more nuances and what that means to be able to stand straight. So let us go. I'm going to share our screen. Welcome, Karen. If you can join us with your camera on, that would be amazing. Okay, so here we are. Let us turn to the very first part, pasuk, of this week's Torah portion. VaYetzei Yaakov meBe'er Shava, and Yaakov left Be'er Shava. VaYelech Harana, and he went to Haran. Now, of course, we understand the simple meaning of this because last week we already had the story of Yaakov taking the rightful place of standing before his father to taking the firstborn blessings that were rightfully his. Welcome, Michelle. But yet his brother didn't feel that way, and of course had harbored evil plans for him, wanting to kill him eventually after his father after Yitzchak passes away. So of course, as we know, Yaakov is told by his mother, go to your father, get further blessings, and you're going to go off to Haran, and you're going to build the Jewish people. So we already know from last week's Torah portion that Yaakov is destined to leave the Holy Land of Israel. He's going to go to Mesopotamia. He's going to start, build a Jewish, get married and build a Jewish home. So the question becomes, what does it mean, VaYetzei Yaakov Be'er Shava, that he left Be'er Shava? We know that he left Be'er Shava already last week. tell us that he went to Haran. That we need to know. But what does it mean that he left? So there's many different explanations. We're going to deal with what the Medrash tells us. But before we get into the Medrash, we need to understand, where does the name Beersheba come from? So if you recall previously, Avraham dug wells, and those wells were closed up by the Plishtim, by the Philistines, and Avram wanted to straighten out the situation. And what did he do? He went to the king of the Philistines, the Plishtim, Avimelech, and he made his claim, right? What are you doing? Inappropriate. Avimelech was in agreement. They made an oath. Where did they make the oath? In Beersheba? Over the wells. So Be'er means wells, and Shava means oath. So it's the oath over the wells, due to the wells, by the wells, and that was in a place called Be'er Shava. And this is what the verse tells us, that, that therefore there was peace between them. Fast forward the next generation, similar thing happened with Yitzchak, with the very same Philistines, Plishtim. And just like his father, he also approached Avimelech, and they reinforced their truce between them. That's the background of the story. Okay? Now, because of this, now Yaakov decides, VaYetzei Yaakov Beersheva. So we know he left Beersheva. So why is the verse telling us this? What's the emphasis over here? It must be trying to tell us another point. Now, something that we've mentioned many times before, Torah is written in shorthand, and we need the oral tradition, the oral teachings, to give us the longhand form of it so we can have a clarity in what it's telling us. Now, it's telling us on many different levels. Simple meaning, midrashic hinted meaning, and there'll be cosmic level, which will be, of course, on a mystical level. And the Chassidus, it will tie it in all together, and which is ultimately what the Rebbe does for us, to be able to tie all of it together. So the Medrash tells us in the following reading, over here, Rabbi Yudan said, the verse is to be read, and Yaakov fled from the wells of oaths. Namely, Yaakov said to himself, I don't want Avimelech, king of the Philistines, to approach me and say, swear to me as your father and grandfather did. So this is obvious, glaring in the eyes. What's going on over here? What's the problem? Why is he running, fleeing Beersheba, right? Now, again, on the simple level, why is he leaving? He's leaving because he was told by his mother and father, this is where you have to leave in order to get married and to create the Jewish people. That's on a simple level, but there's a deeper nuance over here. Why is it repeating Beersheba? Because it wants to give us another dimension. He's not just leaving for that reason, but he's also fleeing because he does not want to make an oath with Avimelech, as his father did and his grandfather did. So the obvious question is, why not? If it was good enough for your father and your grandfather to do this, why isn't it good enough for you? And if indeed it is something that you need to flee, so then why didn't they flee? Why did they make the oath with him? Why did they make a truce with him? What's the distinction over here? This is what we need to understand. Simple question, right? Any questions on the question? Any other questions? Anybody before we continue? Okay. So to answer this, we need to understand the following idea. In the second chapter of Tanya, I'm sure many of you remember, we've learned together, many of us, Tanya. Actually, almost everybody here, we've learned together Tanya. Okay. And how does the second chapter begin? Hanefesh Hashenis b'Yisrael, Yichelek Elokam Imam Mamish. The Alter Rebbe quotes actually from a Medrash, and he adds one word to it. The second soul that enters is a part of God. And he adds only one word to the Medrash, the word mamish, literally. In other words, it's not just a figurative sense of soul, but it's a literal. So what do you mean it's the second soul? Why is it the second soul? We're talking about it's the godly soul. So of course, what's the first soul? Anybody?
Animal soul.
The general soul?
Animal soul.
Oh, thank you, Michelle. Animal soul, exactly. The animal soul is the first one. First of all, by the way, anybody have any proof for that? Like, proof. So, I mean, Tanya's telling us, the Medrash is saying it, so that's proof enough. But experientially, how do we have proof for that?
When you say somebody wants to borrow something and you have to really consider if you want them to borrow it or not, instead of just saying, yes, I can loan you this. Because it's that inner piece of you that's tying you down going, I don't know, you didn't let me borrow your leaf blower when I asked you to, so why should I let you borrow my lawnmower?
Okay, good. But, that not necessarily has to be that way. But why is it necessarily that way? Well, when we were all born, and hopefully we cried when we came out, because if we didn't cry, that's not a good sign, right? We cry. Why do we cry? We didn't cry because someone else didn't have food that day. We didn't cry because someone else was lacking something in life. We cried for ourselves. And then, as a matter of fact, all of our lives is only about us now. We're the cutest little babies, of course. But think about it. You're only motivated by self-directed animal soul. It's a cute one, but it's an animal soul, right? Only by bat mitzvah by a girl at 12 and bar mitzvah by a boy at 13, the beginning of that godly soul becomes now something that is more real and dominant, that it can now give you the power that you can begin to take responsibility for your life, right? Why? Because till then, it was your animal soul that was in control. Now, it was sweet and wonderful, but it was self-directed. Comes the second one is, so not only do we see that time-wise, but even as it comes into us, it's the animal soul that's there first, then comes the godly soul. Now, as a result of that, the natural state of being is that we're pleasure seekers. The natural state is we're looking for enjoyment of life. Now, thank God you're all elevated and wonderful people. So you're looking for enjoyment in life that is, not just eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow you shall die, right? So it's a little more elevated. But the truth is the natural instinct. So is self-directed of the animal soul. And it's an uphill battle that we should become a little more selfless, God-directed, and therefore seeking transcendence of the animal soul. Does that make sense? So it's an uphill battle. And what's the proof? We see that most of the world is not engaged in that uphill battle. Most people are not. We just go on autopilot. Autopilot is seeking the next enjoyable experience, the next pleasurable, thing in life. And, now that there's different levels. So for some people, pleasure is, the Rebbe Rashab explains, Fifth Lubavitcher Rebbe explains, you can have pleasure from an apple. Sweetness, like he says, sweetness. There's a sweetness of an apple. There's a sweetness of music. They're both sweet. One is physical. One is more of the spirit. Even higher than that is the sweetness of ideas, understanding, the mind. And greater than that is the sweetness of godliness. They're all sweet, right? But a distinction, of course. So Baruch Hashem, thank God, we're all here recognizing that there's a sweetness to godly teachings, and therefore we engage in it. But that being said, even if we're on this level, but that the sweetness for us in our lives is not, eat, drink, and be merry, the sweetness of the apple, right? So it's more elevated. But that being said, there's still the struggle. Because again, what came first in me, what's my first responder in life is the animal soul. As Michelle, as you said, so you didn't lend me yesterday the blower for my leaves, right? And now you want something from me. My first response will be, or my first inclination will be not to give, right? I'm going to hold something a grudge against. So it's an uphill battle because the godly soul comes in second. But that being said, we still, we have to struggle. We have to be able to deal with that inner self. So in that, there are two modes of how to deal with it. Two approaches. So let's take an example of the first approach. Life can has its blows. And, Corona included, that it can bring us down. It can have a negative effect upon us, Corona and other life experiences, maybe you're going through something at work or at home, challenged in the livelihood or some health issues or whatever the case may be. And, we're kind of down. But yet, and how do you get yourself beyond that? Well, you got a wedding you got to go to. You're not really feeling so joyous, but somehow when you walk into the wedding hall, and the music is playing, and you see the bride and the groom, the chassan and kala, they're full of life, and hey, you even know them, right? Both sides. And you just swept away all your troubles. You just are able to allow those troubles to be in the back burner, so to speak, and you are able to just celebrate, bring joy to the chassan and kala, and so on. But what happens once you leave? All of a sudden, all those troubles come back. They haven't really been dealt with. What occurred at that time during the simcha? What happened? How come? How come you were able to fulfill the mitzvah appropriate to bring joy to the chassan and the kala, to the bride and the groom? How were you able to do that? Because you were overwhelmed by the goodness and the liveliness and the joy and by the recognition of the great mitzvah to fulfill, and you just gave it your all, even though there was things that were painful, that made you melancholy before you came, but you were able to. All right. Same thing comes, let's say, in other areas in life. We know that, sometimes we go through an experience. Actually, I had an experience this past week. Some of you, I've spoken to you and you've heard from me, but the Kinnis HaShluchim this past week, that was 130 hours straight of a farbringen with brothers that I never saw before, some of them. It was unbelievable. Well, we all have one father. We all feel one father, that the Rebbe is not just our leader, but we feel towards him as a fatherly figure, not just, a world leader, but a fatherly figure. And then because of that, there's a sense of brotherhood as a result. It was enormous. It was unbelievable. And it was awe-inspiring and love-inspiring. And it was just that, I made, as a result, some resolutions and, to do, because the light was so great. The experience was so unbelievable, right? But Thursday night it finished. The light no longer was shining. Now I had to, with the resolutions of commitments of learning in a more, not that I didn't learn, I learned before, but now to do the learning, in the morning when your mind is more clear, and to commit to that, it's a struggle. It's a struggle. Why? Because the light isn't shining anymore. So what happens is, the Alter Rebbe explains to us in Tanya about the Beinoni, the intermediate, right, Jew. And we're, as many of you already know this because we've learned this together, we're not even intermediate, because intermediate means that you have complete mastery over thought, speech, and action. So we are what we call BITs, of course, Beinoni in training, right? So the Alter Rebbe says that the Beinoni, when he goes to daven, he davens with such a fervor that at that moment in his davening, the fiery flames of love towards God are as such that any negativity that's in his heart is like almost doesn't exist. It's gone. It's a magical time. It's as if the animal soul is like, has no reality. That's only because he's davening. After davening, all of a sudden it comes back. All of a sudden. Why? Because it's this great light, right? Just like I had this experience this past week at the Kinnis HaShluchim, right? Or, or the metaphor we gave of the guy who goes to the wedding and he was kind of melancholy beforehand. So the great simcha, was able to put all those melancholy feelings in the back burner by the Beinoni, the davening's allowing that it's going to be in the back burner. But when it's over, those things come back. Those negative things come back. And what do we do then? What were we able to do? Anybody? We were able to subdue it. We were able to subdue it, right? In the moment. And that's an amazing accomplishment. We should not see that as, hey, Jason, we should not see that in a negative light. It's amazing. It's an amazing accomplishment. But it's not a complete transformation. It's an amazing accomplishment. And again, not to minimize it at all. But now what we're going to go is to take it to the next level, where that is subduing. In the jargon of Hasidic teachings, is called iskafia, being able to bend yourself, being able to take that natural soul, the animal soul that brings me my melancholy, that brings me my challenge in a commitment towards something, or in my davening, that in the moment that I'm overwhelmed by a great light of a wedding, of davening, of being together with hundreds of shluchim and being inspired, that it bends that negativity, but doesn't transform it. Now, let's take the metaphor of that guy going to the wedding. Melancholy. Something that's transformative about that melancholy, of the challenges of whatever it is that, we all can fill in the dots for ourselves that we go through. So instead of just the experience being overwhelming, that in that moment you're able to push away the negativity, right? You actually work it through for yourself. You go to like chapter 26 in Tanya, right? Where the Alter Rebbe speaks about the melancholy that we can have because of things that we're going through in our lives and how to deal with it. And you deal with it, recognizing that everything that comes from God is only good. And so much so that, wow, it just, obviously it doesn't happen as quickly as I just said it, but, it evaporates. That melancholy now becomes you're dancing. Not because you're at the wedding, before you got to the wedding, because you were able to transform something from within, right? That anxiety that you had is no longer there. Not because something outside of you was able to come and have such a profound effect upon you, but something from within inside of you was transformed. And therefore, you're able to use that power you were able to use that that transformative power into now. You're singing and dancing before you got to the wedding. Can you imagine when you got to the wedding? What you were like, right? And so let's give a metaphor for this to maybe to appreciate this. To wage battle, nation upon nation. So the conventional way of waging battle, of course, is with foot soldiers, with the air brigade, and with the tanks and the navy, and and you wage a battle, as the Jewish people did in the 6-Day War or in the Yom Kippur War, right? And you're victorious in the battle. Right? You're victorious in that battle. But what happens after the battle? You suppress the enemy, but you didn't change the enemy. The enemy's still the enemy. You subjugated in the moment, but the enemy's still the enemy. Right? So whether it's Russia and Ukraine, whether it's the state of Israel, the land of Israel and the Jewish people with its enemies around them, right? But then there's another kind of battle. And it's not a battle with guns, but it's a battle with ideas. And this is best exemplified in the falling of the Berlin Wall, the falling of communism. There wasn't the shot that was needed. It was an idea that was transformative. The people bought into an idea of freedom, of not subjugating people, and in the communistic fascist manner. And therefore, what you did was won over the other side. And that's what happened, right? So that's a metaphor for now to understand. So in the battle of life that we choose to engage in, by the way, just parenthetically, the more we engage in a battle with ourselves, the more freedom we have. The more we do things on autopilot, the less freedom less free we live, right? In other words, if we're just doing things because we just intuitively or instinctually do it, so that means it is, waging. There's no true freedom there. You're just doing that which is instinctual. True freedom is when you have your natural instinct that motivates you, and then you have your godly soul that allows you to rise up higher, right? And in Hasidic terminology, this is called birur, refinement, transformation from within, taking the character impulses that we have, and as we mentioned, the natural instinct that we have from the animal soul and transforming it. So let's understand. The first way is you have a strong desire for something, right? You want to eat. If you pushed off that desire for 5 minutes and don't eat, what did you do? And you did a mitzvah instead. You studied Torah. 5 minutes, you studied Torah and you didn't eat. The Alter Rebbe says it's an amazing accomplishment in chapter 27 of Tanya. That action. Why? Because you took your natural instinct, the desires to enjoy something right now, and what have you done? You've sublimated or you subjugated that instinct, and now you're studying as we're doing now, let's say, right? As we're doing now, by way of example. Alter Rebbe says that's an amazing, amazing accomplishment. Because you've overcome yourself. Even if it's just for 5 minutes. And try that, folks. Try tomorrow, pushing off your breakfast for 5 minutes, and in those 5 minutes, study some Torah. Or, if you're going to, in those 5 minutes, you're going to do business instead. So then it's just, one natural thing for me that I do then, as opposed to doing something for the sake of Hashem. So you're going to study for an egg. You're going to say Tehillim. Say Tehillim for 5 minutes and then eat breakfast, right? An amazing accomplishment, right? What we've done is not allowed my natural instinct to control me, but I'm in control of it. Yeah, but did my natural instinct change? No, it's still there. And it's great. It's an amazing. And it is transformative in a sense, but not completely. Because after that 5 minutes, our natural desires there, and that's okay. But then there will be times in our lives that we can take the passion that we have for something and just redirect it for something completely holy, right? We can redirect the passion that we might have for the food and redirect it now for our davening or for our learning Tanya or for our learning this class or whatever it is. That's not where I'm having my pleasure. I'm redirecting it into some mitzvah, some connection to God. That's transformative in the sense that I've transformed something from within of me, right? This was the Baal Shem Tov says, who is the Mishnah says in Pirkei Avos, Ezehu Gibor, who is a strong person, who is a mighty person, says what? Someone who conquers their evil inclination. So the Baal Shem Tov explains over here, doesn't mean subdue, but conquer means true conquering is when you can conquer people, but when you have them still have animosity or they're still your enemy, then you haven't truly conquered that nation. When is it true conquering? Is that when the people that you have conquered now want to be absorbed into your nation and be a part of your people. So the same thing is over here. True conquering is not that we merely subjugate our natural inclination, but we actually transform it. Now, again, this is not an easy thing. And this is in most areas in our life. We're not going to be able to do that because that's a righteous person who can do that in every area in their life. But there will be instances that we can. Let me give you an example. And maybe where we could do this. In relationships with loved ones. So it happens, right? That we might have negative feelings because maybe we have an expectation of someone that we love, that they should do something and act in a certain way or whatever the case may be, right? And so the negative thought comes up about them because they didn't act the way we'd hoped they'd act, right? So it's an amazing accomplishment if we push away that negative thought and replace it with a positive one. But has the negativity been transformed? No. It's just we didn't allow it to be expressed, right? Is it still, though, within my subconscious emotional being? Yeah, probably. And probably might come back. But there is a way to make it transformational. How? When you think for a moment about that person, and you could bring yourself to a place of having compassion for them. In other words, instead of seeing their negative behavior as something that brings a negative feeling towards them and a negative thought processes about them, the opposite, it brings you to have compassion. Oh my gosh, what struggles, what a difficult day he is having, she's having. What a struggle that God gave them because this is their nature and this is what they have to contend with. I feel terrible for them. It must be so hard to deal with this. This is what becomes your thought process. What happened to the negative feeling towards them? Completely gone. Why? You've replaced it. You've been transformative within, and now you've changed it to compassion to that person that will bring you ultimately to a love towards that person and act kind towards them, even though they acted completely unkind to you. Completely unkind to you. That's true transformation. That's not subduing the negative feelings and don't let them come up into your cogitated thoughts, meditative thoughts. That's the first level. Push it away. And that's an amazing accomplishment. And sometimes that's all we'll be able to accomplish. But at times, we could strive for something much more profound and much more real. And that takes a lot of digging inside of us. It's not an easy, simple thing. But we are capable of that, of actually having compassion, actually feeling towards them. I feel terrible of what they got to struggle and deal with. And sometimes and they don't even realize that they have this struggle and they have this challenge. That's even more compassion. If they realize, it's one thing, at least they can deal with it. But they don't even realize what they've got. There's a struggle and a challenge, and you have compassion towards them. No negative thoughts there are going to arise. It's not going to be just subdued, subjected. No, that's called conquered. That's called conquered. That's an example. An example over here. So with this, let us go back to our story. Everybody remember our story? What's our story? We're speaking about Yaakov. Yetzei Yaakov and Beersheba. Yaakov left Beersheba. Right? Why did he leave? According to the Medrash, he left because he didn't want to make a peace deal with Avimelech that his father did and his grandfather did. Yitzhak and Avram did. And our question was, why not? If it was good for them, why is it, not good for him? And if it's not good, then why did they do it? So with this now, what we just understood, what we just explained, we'll get it. Avimelech, king of the Plishtim, is not just a story in the Torah of historical significance and brings us closer to our, to our history, brings us closer to our people and so on. It does. It's much more. It is a cosmic significance. It is the story of the battle between good and evil, between light and darkness. That's what it is. Not just a squabble between a couple of, well diggers and well stuffers. No, it is a squabble of cosmic significance between good and evil, the forces of positivity and holiness, and the forces of negativity and unholiness. So when we put it in those terms, now let's understand. Avram, who is and Yitzchak, who are the embodiment of holiness, of goodness, they want to make peace with unholiness and negativity. And how are they going to do it? By subjugating the negative forces, by making a peace deal, right? But not transformative. There's no transformation that's going on over here. It's not a transformative one. Because Avimelech and his people and the Plishtim are not going to be transformed into holy, good people. But they will be at bay. It's like pushing away the negative thoughts. It's like our prayers, that we feel a connection to God very strongly. And our desire for breakfast is subdued. And it's not there at that time of our prayer. Afterwards, all of a sudden, you smell breakfast, all of us. Afterwards, the melancholy that you had before the wedding, it comes back. It comes back. Right? This is the avodah, the service of Avram and Yitzchak. They were not in as much, so to speak, on themselves, but on what their effect on others was. To such a degree as their effect on others, who is the ultimate others, is their own children. Avram, it says, Yatsa Mimenu, Avram had two children, Yitzchak and Ishmael. Yitzchak followed the path. Ishmael didn't, went off the path. Yitzchak, the same thing, two children, Yaakov and Esau. Yaakov followed the path. Yatsa Mimenu, went off the path, was Esau. So in other words, their effect on others was in a way that was not transformative, but kind of bringing Avram was such a kind love. We see Parsha VaYetzei, the angels come and he wants to smother them with goodness and kindness. He's this, wow, an unbelievable experience. But that unbelievable experience didn't penetrate in such a way that the pagans of the day stayed. They didn't. The effect that he had was temporary, even on the people that became believers. It was not something that had a lasting effect. Why? Because it wasn't transformative. Not him, and not Yitzchak. Here it is. The Rebbe says in the Sicham, Abraham and Yitzchak's service was such that the forces of evil were repelled so that they should not be an obstruction, but they were not transformed into holiness. They were not transformed into holiness. Yaakov's approach was different. He was transformational. Now, again, just to make sure that we have clarity over here, we're not talking about transformational of themselves. Themselves, they were tzaddikim. They were righteous, of course, transformational for themselves. We're talking about how they were able to affect others, beginning with their own children. So Avram and Yitzchak were not capable of that. They were able to subdue, but not to transform. Yaakov, though, it says, Mitas Shlema, all of his children, all 12 of them, followed the path, didn't abandon the ways of Hashem. They become the 12 tribes of Israel because his effect and connection with them was transformational. So the Rebbe says here in the Sikha, that was the way of Avram and Yitzchak, served God by contrast, but God, as we just explained, right? By contrast, Jacob's way, Yaakov's way, was completely to transform evil. And as such, he couldn't make peace agreement with Avimelech as he was in his current evil state. So here we have the answer there it gives us. So since this was the unique way of Yaakov of transformational, Avimelech was not ready for that. He was not holding by a place that he was ready, with no bullets being shot, that you're going to, have the fall of communism, fascism, or whatever you want to call it back in the day, right? It wasn't going to happen. They weren't ready for it. So what did he have to do? He had to flee. He had to leave because he was not able to do that. Now we live in a world today that as much as we'd like it to be transformational, it can't always be that way. When you have a negative thought that comes into your head, if you're capable of transforming it into something that's going to be healthy and positive because you work it through and you have the compassion, as we gave the instance earlier, if you have the compassion towards a person and therefore all that negativity will just melt away, that's wonderful. But one thing we have to be certain of is that the negative thought that shouldn't be there, that is inappropriate, should be pushed away. That for sure. We need to do that. And we're not necessarily capable of anything more than that. But that itself is also amazing and shouldn't be looked at as, in a sense, it's second best. But sometimes it's the only way to go. When will be the difference? Times of Mashiach. Everything will be transformative. And now that we're on the footsteps, on the heels of Mashiach, so of course we've got to try whatever we can with ourselves to be transformative. But at the same time, we can't be foolish. So, one of the things that, at the same time, we can't be foolish and think that we're capable of this and this at all times. We're not. But that's okay. We're not yet righteous or fully righteous. We're coming there. We're going to get there. We're going to be there. Absolutely. But that's going to take some time. And if we all work together on this, that's what's going to happen. So I want everybody now to put on your camera, please. So I could take a picture of you saying hello. Unmute you, please. Unmute yourselves. If you have any questions, any comments, if anybody has a question, first of all, say, please, Jason, Amy, Robin, Lori. Souls. That, when you look at someone's eyes, you look at someone's face, then you can know that there's a soul. When you look at a person, you look at their face. Why do you look at their face? I look at their face because by looking at the face, in particular the eyes, that's the gateway to the soul. And what do we want? You want to connect to another individual. So by looking, you have that connection. So I'm still looking for Amy, Robin, and Lori. In the meantime, everybody smile. Everybody wave. And anybody have a question? Comment. Andrew, you have some?
Just for me, I understand what you're saying, but if you were in business that requires you to advocate for a particular position, the other person is naturally the opposite, it's kind of hard to act in a nice sort of way, so to speak, if that's your job. And the only time I really feel what you're talking about is when I put tefillin on in the morning and I say prayers. I mean, to the extent I can try to focus on the prayers, but it dissipates as soon as you're done.
You're right. That's what we said. You're right. There's a residue that remains because you know what? The day we don't pray, then it's not good, right? Or we pray, later than we should. We go to work first and then pray. As a matter of fact, I heard an amazing story. Dr. Block, who is a Alav Shalom, who actually took me to the Rebbe, the first person that took me to the Rebbe, 1974. So he was a Aristotelian philosophy professor at Western University in London, Ontario. So in the mid 60s, his summer schedule was that he only had one class to teach, and that was 8 o'clock in the morning. And then the rest of the day was free. And he was so excited because then he could daven now, like lengthier davening, he could learn, he could really, devote himself to all of this. And so he went into the Rebbe by Yechidus, and he told the Rebbe the new schedule, and he was so excited. And the Rebbe said, God forbid, chas v'sholom, you can't go to work and then daven. You have to daven and then go to work. And the Rebbe added, when you daven, you're going to be illuminated with the davening, that when you go to teach those students, they're going to feel the effect of your davening in the teaching. And what's he teaching? Philosophy. He's not teaching, he's teaching Aristotelian philosophy. He's not teaching, teaching the Torah portion, right? But they're going to feel the illumination of your davening in the teachings, not just, and even the non-Jews will also feel that and sense that. So you got to first daven and then go to work. So yeah, you're right. There's a residue that remains. And but the struggles come back. Now, as far as, the fact that as a lawyer, you need to represent your client, and then the one who is you're waging a battle against. Okay, that's a different story. That's part of work, and that's part of, remember, there's a refinement in dealing with on that level where there's the oddly soul animal soul battle, two sides. Even in that, there's ways that we need to still do things in an appropriate manner with appropriate etiquette and so on. But that's probably not going to be as transformative experience. But thank you, Andrew. Anybody else? Questions, comments? All right, so everybody, I'm going to video now. Everybody, unmute and just say Shavua Tov.
Shavua
Tov.
Thank you, everybody.
Tov.
All right, folks. Thank you for joining. All the best.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi.
God
Thank
bless.
you.
Bye-bye.
Wow.
Good night.
Thank you.
Thank
Good
you.
Night.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank
All be
you.
well.
Good night.
Good night.
Yeah.